Welcome. In this lecture, we are going to be sorting out the last of our gun architecture problems. We're going to be doing this by making sure that our first person can have recoil, and we're going to also make sure that the third person has the gun in their hands, is able to play an animation with recoil as well at the same time as we are. And we are going to make it so that when we die, our third person mesh dies with the gun in its hand. So how are we going to achieve all of that? Well, the way we're going to achieve all of that is by attaching the gun to the correct mesh whenever the player is actually controlling the mesh, and then we're going to reattach when the player dies. That's basically what we're seeing there. And I'm going to challenge you to make sure that two montages can be played from the gun simultaneously. So we're going to be finding out how all of this is achieved in this lecture. Join me and let's go through it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is be able to attach a gun correctly to a mesh if it's a player. Now, what do I mean by that? When is it that we want to have a gun in the third person mesh's hands? When is it that we want to have the gun in the first person mesh's hands? Because obviously we've only got one gun now, we don't have multiple meshes like we had with our firing component, so the gun can only be in one place at one time. We can't actually have it both physically in the third person's hands and physically in the first person's hands. They're actually in two different locations on purpose. So what do we need to do? How can we change it round? Well, the way we can change it round is to say that when we are possessed by a player, that is when we're going to put the gun in the first person mesh's hands. Otherwise, by default, we leave it in the third person mesh. And then when the player dies, essentially we depossess our player. We're no longer the player possessing, and we will want to put the gun back into the third person mesh's hands so that we can look at our dead body and it's holding the gun rather than gun just floating randomly in the air. So that's a two-step process, and they correspond to the two steps in my Sublime editor here. So what we're going to do is take a little stab at that. So we're going to do this over in the Mannequin C++. Now, you may be tempted to use some of the callbacks on the character. There are two callbacks that are relevant here. And we can go and have a look at them over in the character.h file. And if we search for the word possess, that is the... So if you manage to get hold of the character.h file, you can do that by going to your mannequin.h, and with Visual Studio at least, you can do F12 on the A character, and that's going to take you, with a little bit of IntelliSense waiting, to the character.h. Now, in the character.h, we have two important methods over, for me, they're on line 470 and 471, and these methods are possessed by and unpossessed. These are both notification methods telling us that we've just been possessed by a new controller, or that we have been unpossessed by the controller that was possessing us before. Now, you might be tempted to say, okay, well, let's take that possessed by, this is what I did in my first attempt at this, take that possessed by callback and check whether the controller is a player controller. If it's a player controller, then we put the gun in the first person mesh's hands, and then subsequently on an unpossess, we take the gun and put it into the third person's hands. Well, that all seems well and good, but in actual fact, the possessed by happens before begin play, and therefore it happens before the gun is actually spawned. So again, not ideal. But that does lead us to saying, well, why not just do it in begin play then in that case? Because here in begin play for the mannequin, we've got our attachment code here already. It's got attached a component. It's attaching to the first person mesh and to that grip point. Why don't we just say that if it's being possessed by a player, we do one thing, and if it's not being possessed by a player, we do something else? That's exactly what I'm going to do. And you can do it in one of two ways. You can get hold of the controller, for example, and ask the controller if it is a player controller, like so. But a nice shorthand to this that exists on the character and probably most pawns is player controlled. And that's just a method directly on the character class, on our class, that allows us to do just that. Perfect. So I'm going to do is controlled. If it's controlled, we attach to mesh 1p. And if it isn't, so else, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to attach it to the main mesh. Unfortunately, I'd love to call it mesh 3p, but we can't do that because there needs to be a default mesh for our character. So we need to have this slight inconsistency of doing a get mesh instead. And then what's the name of the attach point? Well, you can go and look it up, but I've looked it up before already, and I know that the attach point for that mesh is 0_0. So grip point _0, presumably because there's a left hand and a right hand. Not entirely sure. Or maybe it's just a quirk of the naming or how we did it. I can't quite remember whether we did it or whether it was already there. But the point is, we've got this if-else statement. We're going to go over to Unreal, compile it, and see whether at least we've now got the gun in the third person hands, even if when we die, we perhaps don't quite look right. Yes, so the third person's got the gun in their hands. They are shooting with the shooting animation. We've got the gun in our hands. Now, I would expect us, if we die, for that not to quite work out. So what I'm going to go to do is go over to the world outliner, select my player, and go back into details. And you remember we set the health ridiculously high. Well, we're going to set it now ridiculously low so that the player dies sooner. So here we've got the health. I'm going to set it down to 10, so one shot should be enough to kill us off. And let's go ahead and hit play. Now, let me give myself a little bit more room because I don't like playing with such little room. Let's go over to our player and get killed. And you see, we've obviously got this floating gun now, so that's not ideal. Let's figure out how to do that. That's the next step on Sublime. So I'm going to say we've done attaching the gun to the correct mesh. We just need to reattach that gun when the player dies. So what's that? Well, this is where we're going to need that notification, the unpossessed notification. So I'm actually going to copy it from here, from the character, and go into my mannequin.h. And let's see, where's a good place to put this notification? I think just about after our setup player input component, we've got a bunch of overrides here already. I'm going to override the unpossessed, and we're going to need to go and implement that over in mannequin again. I'm going to put that after the setup input component just for consistency. So it was, I think, void a mannequin as usual in this file, : unpossessed. Unpossessed. No arguments, that makes it nice and easy. And we need to remember to call super here, because if you don't, some weird stuff can happen, like the character may not be able to move. The reason for this is that the AI system is actually using this possessed and unpossessed notifications at some point to, and in the blueprint, I assume, to make sure that the various things are going on in the AI. I don't know exactly what's going on. We don't need to know exactly what's going on, because in general, we should always be calling up to the superclass. So I'm just going to call up to unpossessed. And what are we going to do when we get depossessed? Well, we're going to put the mesh into our third person mesh. So we could think about turning this into a method because it's being called in 2 places. My usual rule of thumb is do it in 3 places and then think about turning it into a method. So we're not quite there yet. I'm going to remove this outdated comment, and I'm going to remove that outdated comment here as well. So let's see, attach mesh component to skeleton, doing it here because skeleton's not created in the constructor. That only needs to exist in one place, so I'm going to bring that comment to the line above the if statement, because that kind of applies to both of the attachments then, or at least it reads like it applies to both the attachments. The getAnim instance can be there with a bit of a new line to space things out and make things a little bit more readable. I'm just tweaking things for legibility at this point. So we have got attachment, we've got detachment on unpossess, or rather not really detachment, but attaching, reattaching to the third person mesh. So let's give that a shot. So I'll go ahead, hit play, get myself killed. Oh yes, I need to compile. Obviously, I'm just too used to Blueprint at this point. As you guys know, we have a little bit too much Blueprint in the section so far, so I'm just getting used to not having to compile. But unfortunately, we do have compiles to do with C++, even though I do prefer writing the C++. I wish you could have the best of both worlds. Write in C++, have the compile times of Blueprint, and then just do one big compile at the end. So just let it interpret as it goes along and then compile later. Okay, we die. The gun's not there, so if we F8 to depossess, you can see our floating arms right there, but our dead third-person mannequin lying on the floor with its gun still in hand. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. That's the behavior we wanted. So I'm going to make sure that my map is saved. I'm just making sure that things are saved in general. Always a good plan. So that is that, which, as you guys know, means it is challenge time. Challenge time. Now, the challenge in this lecture is to play 2 montages. What I mean by that is that just playing our game at the moment, you can have a go at shooting, but there's no montage being played from our first-person arms. Only the third person is now currently playing a montage because we set up the anim instance to point towards the third-person meshes anim instance. So I want you to fix that. I want that the BP gun has 2 anim montages, 2 montages, one for the third person and one for the first person. We already have those montages. It just needs that the gun has the ability to take both of those as editor values. And then we want the first person and third person should play fire montages. So when we hit the fire button, both the AI and us should be showing a firing animation from that animation montage. And here's the hint that you need to configure 2 anim instances on our gun class in C++. So pause the video and have a go at this challenge. Okay, welcome back. So let's try this out. Let's have a go at implementing 2 montages. Well, the place to go, obviously, is the gun class, and the smoking gun is that I've had these classes open the whole video, and we're going to be adding in, as I said, a second anim instance. So one thing about this anim instance is that it starts off as being a U property, and that's not really ideal. There's no point at which I want that anim instance to be configured anywhere but in C++. So I'm going to actually remove that U property until we need it, maybe at a later date. But for now, we don't need it. Just a quick post-video edit. In general, it's not actually a good idea to remove the U properties. Just remove all the arguments from within their brackets. The reason for this is that a U property means that Unreal will not garbage collect this object. So if you want to be sure that it won't just disappear on you, you should put the U property there. Now, as it happens, in this case, our anim instance is referenced from somewhere else, so it doesn't get collected and we're okay. But that's just getting away scot-free. Really, you should leave the U property there, just with empty brackets after it. And I'm going to create 2 uanim instances. Obviously, they can't have the same name. So one of them is going to be 1p, following the naming convention in C++, and the other one's going to be 3p. So we've got the animation instance of the first person and the third person. That's how to read that. And we need to do a similar thing with the fire animation because we're going to need to configure 2 anim montages. I'm going to rename the comment. So anim montages to play each time we fire. That can apply to both of these fire montages. I'm going to correct the default indentation, which gets created for us when we do U properties just by Visual Studio, I believe. And the fire animation is going to be 1p and 3p, which just makes sense. So that fire animation is where we're going to be changing it in the BP gun. And the anim instance is what we are going to be calling it on. So I'm going to go over to my C++, which should now be broken, my gun C++. It's going to take a little while, as usual, for Visual Studios to catch up and tell me that it's broken, but I know it is because our fire animation and anim instance have now been renamed and are no longer there. So you may have noticed that I've used null in some of the previous videos, and that's come from this code here, and it seems to be dotted around Visual Studios and the Unreal codebase in general. Don't worry about it. If you're wondering why null over null pointer, now generally speaking, null pointer is a better bet. It's more modern. It's a newer feature in C++, so I would go with null pointer where possible. But don't worry if you see null, it basically means the same thing. It's just that it doesn't really have the type of a pointer, and so sometimes when doing some type matching in C++, it won't know that you're looking for a pointer type with a null pointer. But really, it's not that big a deal. So don't worry about it too much. And it's a bit of an advanced concept as to why you'd use null over null pointer. Okay, so we've got these 2 if statements. I find these 2 if statements a little bit garish. There's too much stuff going on there. So I'm going to do an if fire animation not null and fire anim instance not null. That gets us rid of a level of indentation here. And we are going to need to rename the fire animation and anim instance. So I'm going to do the 1p instance first. Just putting 1p after everything. It couldn't be a simpler rename, really. There we go. And, well, very simply, we're going to do the same thing for the third person. So copy and paste that block and go and rename everything from 1p to 3p in that new block. Okay. And oh dear, I just noticed that we're both using null and null pointer. That's just inconsistent. I'm going to, at least on the same line, have a little bit of consistency, Sam. So there we go. Fire animation 1p not equals null pointer and and the animation instance not equal null pointer. So we have both basically. Go ahead and play the first person animation and the third person animation if possible. So there is another place in the C++ that this is going to break. It's over in Mannequin C++, where we are setting up our gun, where we have our gun arrow anim instance equals get mesh get anim instance. Well, very simply, we can go ahead and do this for both the first person and the third person. So this second line is actually the third person mesh. So anim instance 3p get mesh, blah, blah, blah. And then gun anim instance, set it, anim instance 1p equals mesh 1p. If I can type, always helpful. Mesh 1p, and we're going to get anim instance. If I can. Visual Studio manages to correct for the fact that I type like a very horrible person. My input component, I'm going to switch over to null pointer as well. It's my own code. I don't really have the excuse of using somebody else's. I'm just going to do it where I see it, just for consistency. Okay, cool. So we have set up those anim instances. One more place remains for us to go and correct things with the gun, and that would be in the BP gun itself. So I'm going to go into dynamic weapons, FP weapon behavior, and open up the BP gun. Let it load, and here we have our BP gun micro editor. I'm going to open up the full editor. Well, I don't know what the other editor is called, the abbreviated editor or something like that, but I quite like to call it the micro editor. So the BP gun's obviously not updated yet because we haven't compiled our C++. So let's go ahead and compile the C++ as well. But where we're expecting it to show up is in our details pane at the root level of the gun, or the BP gun, where we have this gameplay section. We've obviously got a fire sound. That's going to be the same whether you're third person or first person. And the animation is going to be different, however. So I've got a failure to compile. What have I done wrong? Oh no. Oh dear. Anim instance is not a member of a gun in the first person character. Oh, right. So the first person character is not happy with me because it uses the gun as well. So let's go over to that and just, well, let's just rename this to 1p just to keep it happy. Was there anywhere else that it might have mentioned this? See declaration of a gun under weapons. What's that problem there? Let's go over to Visual Studio, have a look at that. That seems fine. Let's just try recompiling. Hopefully the issue has gone away. Isn't going to bug us anymore. That sounded positive. Okay, so let's go over to our BP gun. And now, yes, we've got our fire animation 1p and 3p. And it should be very easy to go ahead and select the correct fire montages. So the FP1 here, the TP1 in the second. Compile and save that blueprint and go over to our editor and play. Okay, I've got recoil. That's looking promising. Does the character have recoil? Yes, they've got recoil. They'll carry on shooting and show us that we've got recoil. And if we F8, we're lying there with the gun still in hand. That is perfect. I'm very, very happy that that has all worked out and ticked off the last of our challenges, which is fantastic. So with that in hand, the ability to do our 2 montages, change our gun around, do this all in C++, we're able to move on from this gun re-architecting onto bigger and better things. And I'll see you in the next lecture where we'll do that.